Today I'm going to walk you through how I process time lapses through LR Timelapse. Now, I've been doing time lapses for a long time. I did my first one back in 2013 or 14 using motion control, and I was using an old Philip Bloom pocket dolly with some Kessler. It was a disaster, and it was kind of a very tedious process. Fortunately, these days it's a lot easier. Most of our cameras have built-in intervalometers, which allows us to take time-lapse images and prepare them for processing in post-production. That said, there's many ways you can process time lapses. One of the simplest ways is you can simply record a video and speed it up. That's a time lapse essentially. The problem with that is you don't have as much control. Another way to do it is you can export all of your images that you take in your intervals as a JPEG sequence, and you can process those through After Effects. You can literally upload the photos to After Effects and just export it as a time lapse, and it's a pretty simple way to do it. The way I prefer to do it though is using LR Timelapse. So what LR Timelapse does is it actually allows you to edit and make fine-tune adjustments to the metadata of the photos that you have in Lightroom, and you can sync between Lightroom and LR Timelapse to create a very smooth ramped image. In fact, LR Timelapse stands for level and ramp, which it used to stand for Lightroom, but they had to change it to level and ramp due to legalities, of course. Anyway, none of that matters. It's going to be a lot easier if I just show you how it works. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. Now, for this particular project I'm working on, I've put a lot of videos out for this project just because a lot of the things that I typically do with editing have presented themselves in this video. I've already gone through and processed, I think, 8 or 9 of these time lapses. I did quite a few for this project for various reasons, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to work on this one. I have not yet processed this one, but essentially what we're going to be creating is this. I'm just kind of previewing these through Lightroom. I've got 168 photos, which is I think just over 6 seconds. That'll create on a 24 frame per second clip. Timeline rather. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Now I've got my sequence of photos in here. You don't really need to do anything just yet. You don't need to do any editing just yet. It kind of integrates with LR Timelapse, as I mentioned. So what we're going to do is we're going to hop into LR Timelapse, and it is a paid program. I don't know if there's a free version there. I'm sure there is a free version that you can do for demo purposes, but I use the pro version. I'm not sure what it costs. You'll have to look it up. I'm not sponsored by LR Timelapse or anything either. So you can click the link in the description and you can go ahead and check it out. But anyway, what you do is you navigate to your folder, and I'm already in there, BNA 15, and it gives you a preview of what it looks like so far unprocessed. And this is basically what we are putting together. Now, I'm doing this time lapse using motion control. Right now I have a Rhino slider and the Rhino Arc 2, and that allows me to have full motion control over the time lapse. So I can slide and pan and tilt while a time lapse is processing. It's actually really cool, and I love using it. Now, I'm not going to do a 100% full tutorial on how to use LR Timelapse. There's a lot of things you can do within LR Timelapse that's not really relevant to what we're doing right now. But I would encourage you to check out the tutorials that LR Timelapse has put out, as well as there's many other tutorials out there on how to use LR Timelapse if you don't get what you need from this video. But this video should at least get you started. So I'm going to quickly walk you through what the interface looks like. This is obviously our preview window, if you couldn't tell. Up here we've got, these are the actual actions that we're going to take. They call it the visual workflow. Keyframes wizard, Holy Grail wizard, etc. We'll get into that in a minute. And then below here you've got, these are your actual images and all the metadata information that goes along with them. Your exposure, ISO, shutter speed. You can see I was shooting at f/18, shutter speed of a half second or 0.5 seconds. Is that a half second? Doesn't matter. ISO 100, etc. I don't have any deflicker set in my Lightroom, that you can see. So as I go along, and I scroll down, you can see which image we're on. And if you look over in the preview window, you're going to see this blue line. This indicates all these peaks and valleys you see here. These are my exposures. So as I go along, you can see there's little bumps where things get slightly brighter and slightly darker, and it's kind of progressively it's going to get a little brighter right here, and then it's going to slowly start getting darker as we go down. very subtly. So what LR Timelapse job is to do is level this out and give me a smooth ramp on this time lapse. So we're going to hopefully go from this scattered peaks and valleys timeline to a smoother timeline, and we're going to walk through that right now. So we're going to start up here on this visual workflow, and we're going to start by hitting this keyframes wizard. Now what this keyframes wizard does, it creates keyframes amongst all of the photos that you have within your time lapse. And those keyframes are important because they're moments in your timeline that you're going to bring back into Lightroom, and you're only going to edit the photos that you have assigned a keyframe to. And you could technically go through and do it manually, but I would suggest just sticking to the keyframes wizard. And you can select how many keyframes you want to add. As you can see as I scroll along up to 20, you can see these blue dots starting to get added to each individual frame. Now, the way you determine how many actual keyframes that you want to use, I do it by looking at the actual peaks and valleys and seeing how much of a dramatic change I have within the frame or within the entire sequence. That kind of tells me what I'm going to be dealing with here. And I want to try to have keyframes that are kind of relatively close to when those big changes happen. So for example, if you look up here, this yellow line represents evenly exposed. And you can tell, like up here towards the front, I am overexposed up here as it goes along. And then it's going to start getting underexposed from this point out, okay? So I know that between right here, I've got dramatic changes. So I'm at 10 keyframes. And I can see those 10 keyframes pretty much cover all of the dramatic changes that are happening. So I think I'm going to start this off with 10 keyframes, okay? We can ignore this Holy Grail wizard for this tutorial because it's not really relevant to what we're doing, but I'll explain it really quick. The Holy Grail wizard, essentially there's this phrase in time-lapse creation called Holy Grail, and that's basically when you do a day to night transition or a night to day transition, or really whenever there's a dramatic lighting change from the beginning of your sequence to the end of your sequence and vice versa. This button here helps you smooth that out. And again, we're not going to get into that here, but if you need to know how it works, maybe I'll create a separate tutorial on how to do Holy Grail. Once we have our keyframes selected, we're going to go ahead and hit save. What that's going to do is it's going to create a star or a star rating, like you know in Lightroom how you can do stars, a star rating system. It's going to create that in the metadata. So when I go back to Lightroom, I can go to my grid view by hitting G, and I have all of the images in the thing selected. And you can see these little exclamation point boxes. That's letting me know that there's been some change to the metadata. So we're going to make sure all of them are selected. We're going to right click, and we're going to go to metadata and read metadata from files. What this is going to do is going to update all of the metadata with any changes that we made within LR Timelapse, okay? So it's just about done doing that. We're done. Now you're going to go down to this where it says no filter here, and you're going to select the second option here, 01 LRT keyframes. Now, when you install LR Timelapse, it also installs a plugin into Lightroom that allows the two programs to talk to each other. And what happens with LR Timelapse, you can do full sequence like we have selected right now. You can do just the keyframes, LRT, Lightroom Timelapse, or Level and Ramp Timelapse keyframes. So these are the keyframes that were made. So what LR Timelapse wants us to do is it wants to make adjustments to only these photos. And then it's going to build the rest of the sequence. It's going to fill all those in with the metadata. We'll get to that shortly, okay? But in the meantime, let's just focus on only editing these images that we selected as part of our keyframes. The idea is we want to edit all 10 of these keyframes, and we want them to all be pretty much evenly exposed as close as we possibly can. LR Timelapse will do the job of smoothing it all out. So we're just going to get started. We're going to edit this thing basically how we want it to look. So I'm going to bring up my shadows, bring down my highlights a little bit. And I got to remember that these first two keyframes were slightly overexposed. But to me, I'm looking at my histogram here. This looks like a pretty evenly exposed image. I want all of my images to be kind of in that range. So after you edit your first image, select them all. Go up to this little guy up here. This is the scripts editor for LR Timelapse. And we're going to go to LR Timelapse Sync Keyframes. All right, we do that, and it's going to go ahead and sync all the settings that we did on this first image across all of those. For the sake of the time lapse, you don't want to use the sync feature in Lightroom. You want to use LR Timelapse's sync feature. I don't know why. I'm not going to pretend I do, but I just follow the rules, and that's what they told me to do. That's what I'm going to do. So use this, not the sync feature in Lightroom, okay? Once we've edited our first one, we can move on to the second one. And essentially, we're just going to go back and forth here for a second. Make sure that the exposures are somewhat even, and they pretty much are. We don't need them to be perfect, but as close as possible is better. So we'll just try to dial that in a little bit. And now that we've made adjustments to the second image, I'm going to select the second one and the rest of the images, but not the first one. And I'm going to sync them all again. And you're going to rinse and repeat this entire process. So now I'm going to move to image 3. I can see it's underexposed. I'm going to bring this up. And by the way, if you didn't know, you can do exposure editing just by dragging the histogram around. A lot of people don't know that. I don't know how it's 2023 and people don't know that yet, but surprise, it's a little trick you can do. So again, we just want to make sure they're somewhat close. Again, they don't have to be perfect because LR Timelapse is going to smooth everything out for us in a little bit here. So now we're going to go ahead and sync all of these. And we're going to go to image 4. And what we're going to see is now these are all pretty much going to be about the same. I don't need to do a ton of editing. As long as they all appear to be closely matched in tonality, then we're good to go. We're going to skip ahead. I'm not seeing any that are too underexposed. It starts getting a little dark right here. So let's just go ahead and bring 9 and 10 up. And I'm just switching back and forth between 9 and 10. I know 10's a little darker than 9. So we're going to go ahead and bring that up. So now we have all 10 of our keyframes that we selected in our time lapse pretty much evenly exposed. Again, they don't need to be perfect. We just want to get them as close as possible. And I can glance on my histogram, I can glance at the actual image, and I can see that they're all pretty close together. The other thing I want to make sure of is that my white balance is syncing, okay? That can be a big issue if your white balance is not the same across the entire board. So keep an eye on your white balance, make sure that that is syncing. If it's not syncing, you're going to have to troubleshoot that, okay? So we've got all of our keyframes updated. They're somewhat evenly exposed. We're going to go ahead and right click on the group when they're all selected. In fact, you can go to grid view if you want to, just by hitting G. Make sure they're all selected. Right click on any one of them, go to metadata and hit save metadata to files. That's going to save all of the adjustments that we just made in Lightroom to the metadata. So now we can go back into LR Timelapse. We can hit reload. And what's going to happen is LR Timelapse is going to reload all of the changes that we just made to those images on the keyframes. We're going to go ahead and we're going to hit this auto transition button. Now what this is going to do is it's going to go through, and you can see how it's starting to slowly fill all these in. LR Timelapse, this is where the beauty of LR Timelapse is. What it's essentially doing is going in between each of these keyframes, and it's calculating what do these numbers need to be in between all the keyframes to where we can make this thing appear to be evenly exposed throughout the entire sequence. So it's going through and it's making these calculations, and we're just about done with the visual preview. So if you remember before we went into Lightroom, there was a blue timeline here that was kind of jagged, and it was going down and basically indicating that it was underexposed towards the end. Now you can see that it's created a pink line, which kind of goes more across the evenly exposed line. This yellow is kind of a better visual representation of what the trend looks like as it goes along. We can see it starts perfectly evenly exposed, goes slightly underexposed, and then it comes up and the rest of it's pretty even. So what we need to tell LR Timelapse to do is even out all these exposures. So let's just go ahead and hit play. It's still going to be a little bumpy because you can kind of see all these pink lines. It's going to be a little flickery. Right? But what you also notice is that it's not underexposed anymore. The exposure more or less stays the same throughout the entire thing. It's fairly consistent. Now we have this pink line to deal with, right? So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to deflicker this. And what deflickering it does, it essentially smooths out those peaks and valleys, those exposure for the exposure, so that it brings the peaks down and it brings the valleys up, and it creates an even timeline, a more even timeline, so that where you can reduce the flicker. Because each time you see a peak and valley, that is flicker happening. And I'll play it one more time so you can kind of see it. But you can kind of see how it's like the exposure is going dark, white, or dark, bright, dark, bright. It's just flickering essentially. And we don't want that to happen. We want this to be perfect. So we're going to deflicker this thing. And the first thing you're going to do is you don't see it. There's no box to indicate that it's there. But find a neutral surface. Usually it's like if you're outside, it's like a sky or something that is going to be somewhat neutral throughout the whole point, throughout the entire sequence. Right here, I've got like this area right here. I know this is going to, for the most part, be pretty neutral. And when I do the deflicker, you can kind of see it adjusted the timeline here. When I do the visual deflicker, it's going to use that as a reference. I think that's how it works. I could be wrong. Feel free to correct me. But it's going to use that as a reference when I'm doing the visual deflicker. So visual deflicker, like I said, it's going to smooth out that timeline, and you can see what's happening right here. This green here, it's kind of telling you what it's going to aim to do. It's going to try to smooth this out and make this jagged pink line be a little bit smoother. And it does 2 passes, and every time I'm going to hit apply, and every time it does a pass, it goes through and it cleans it. It does 1 pass to clean it up, and you can see it's those pink lines are starting to smooth out quite a bit. And then after it does the first pass, it's going to go through and do a second pass and smooth it out even more. And I can do as many passes as I need to continue to smooth that thing out. So we'll see what that looks like in just a second here. All right, so the first pass is completed, and you can already see how smooth it's made that. But we still have a lot of work to do. It's going through the second pass right now, and it's going to smooth those lines out even more. But I have a feeling that once that's gone, it's still not going to be smooth enough. We want it to be as close to this green line as possible to give us a nice smooth sequence. All right, so it's gone through and it's done 2 passes on the visual deflicker. We're going to hit play to preview it and see how it looks. Again, there's still a few bumps in here which could be a little flickery, but it's significantly smoother compared to where it was when we first loaded it into LR Timelapse. So let's go ahead and preview it, see what this thing looks like. Yeah, you can see it's still a little flickery, so we're going to go ahead and refine this, but it definitely looks a lot better. So let's go ahead and go back into visual deflicker, and you're going to see that the apply button is no longer an option. Right now, the only option available to us is refine. We already have it set to do 2 passes, so we're going to go ahead and hit refine. And all it's going to do is going to go through, it's going to smooth that out even more. So every time we hit refine, it's going to just continue to work out those kinks where there's still a little bit of flicker. So that's really nice because you can keep on going, and each time LR Timelapse is going to improve it just a little bit more. As you can see, it's getting closer and closer to that green line. I'm pretty sure after the second pass, it's going to be pretty solid. And now keep in mind, there still might be a little bit of flicker because if you've got light that's coming through windows and that's constantly adjusting, there's going to be flicker. You really can't avoid that. What you want to try to avoid is a constant change in exposure, and you want them to be you want the overall exposure to somewhat be pretty consistent throughout the entire sequence. All right, so we finished up our second pass. We're going to go ahead and hit play, see what that looks like. A lot smoother with just a few little flickers in there. Let's see if we can't scroll down here and figure out where those are coming from. Maybe we can try to smooth that out even more. So we're just going to kind of go one by one. And right here we've got some bumps in the road. And I had a feeling it was going to be that one. Right here you can see this little bump happening. So that's going to bother me each time. And there's a few that happen in here as well. So we're going to continue to refine this. And there's also some bumps at the end here, right? So we're going to continue to refine this thing. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and just put this up to 4 passes, and we're going to hit refine. Now I'm going to time lapse through this so that you don't have to hear me yapping away, and we can kind of see what this looks like when we're all done. Okay, you're still going to get some flickering if you've got some dramatic lighting situations happening. And in this particular situation, I literally have a big wall of windows behind me, and the sun is kind of peeking out behind some overcast clouds. So it's kind of unavoidable. It's just going to happen. You can still make some micro adjustments to wherever that's happening. So I want to find that one particular shot that goes really dark for a second and see if I can't manually lighten that up. Now, actually, and if you look over on this wall right here in the corner, you can watch as it goes, like the lighting is changing. And you can even see this little speck of sunlight coming out. You can see when the clouds are peeking out from the overcast. So it's kind of out of our control a little bit. But right here it gets really bright for a second, and then it gets dark again. So I can see right here we jump from 0.553 to 0.480 to 0.53 again. So let's see if we can't bring this one down just a little bit to try and match up with what the other guys are doing here. So if you look over to the right, you can see we do have some control similar to what you would see in Lightroom. I try not to use this that much, honestly, because it's very slow compared to just bringing it back into Lightroom. But I also, if I bring this entire sequence back into Lightroom, I have to start the whole process over again for the visual deflicker. And I don't want to do that. I just want to adjust this one frame here. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to bring this down to, I'm going to do it very, very slowly, very incrementally. There we go. That kind of evens it out a little bit. So I had to go in there and just manually adjust it. And you can kind of do this for other things that are super dramatic. Like this gets really bright here for a second, so we'll maybe bring this one down as well. And then it gets really bright again, so let's see. Yeah, it starts getting really bright again. Okay, so this is good enough for me. This is going to be maybe half of this I'll use in the video, but either way, it's good with me. So let's just pretend we're all done with what we're doing in LR Timelapse. We're just going to go ahead and hit save again. And what that's going to do is going to take all of the changes that we made within LR Timelapse, including the visual deflicker. It's going to take all of this data that was generated with LR Timelapse's algorithm. It's going to save all of that to the metadata so that we can go back into Lightroom. We can switch this filter to full sequence. And we're going to select every single one of the images, right click on any one of them, read metadata from files. And it's going to update every single one of these images with all the changes that we made within LR Timelapse. And once the metadata has all been updated for every single one of the images, you can kind of go through if you want to, and you can see every change we made within LR Timelapse is now applied to these images. The next step we need to do is export all of these back into LR Timelapse, and it's going to create a movie clip a video clip for us. So LR Timelapse creates a Lightroom export plugin for us. We're going to go ahead and hit export, and we're going to go to LRT Pro. And you can select any one of these options. I do the TIFF, the 16-bit. It's a large file format, and it's going to give me basically the original files, 16-bit TIFFs. So what it's going to do is it's going to export every single one of these 168 photos as a TIFF, a 16-bit TIFF, and then it's going to open LR Timelapse back up and allow me to create a video clip out of that. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording right now, let this thing process. It's going to take about 5-10 minutes or so, and then I'll come back and we will finish this thing up. Okay, so the files have finished rendering in Lightroom, and now they have opened up this dialog here in LR Timelapse, which is where we're going to render this video. So what it's essentially done, it's taken all those images, it's created a TIFF sequence, and we're going to export it based on whatever codec we want. So we're just going to do H.264, which is an MP4 file. Like if I want to do it at 6K, but I didn't film anything else in 6K or 8K, so I filmed everything in 4K. So we're just going to export it in 4K, and we're going to do ultra high quality. I don't know, I haven't ever actually experimented with this, so I don't know what the difference between all of these is. I just do the ultra high because, you know, why not? You can add the 16:9 crop ratio, but I want to be able to make that selection on my own in post-production, so I'm just going to export it as a full frame. Otherwise, you know, like I said, you can specify where you want your aspect ratio to be. But pretty much we're all set. I'm just going to go ahead and hit render video. And we're going to let it do its thing. It's going to take a few minutes to render this out. And then when it's all done, we will have a time lapse to view. All right, so it just finished rendering. Let's go ahead and see what we have for a final video. Not bad. Again, it's a little flickery, but I'm probably not going to use this entire sequence. It'll probably just be a quick little glimpse, and I can even add another deflicker once I get it into DaVinci Resolve. While I'm in here, I guess I'll show you some of the other time lapses that I've processed using this same exact method that we just went through. This is another one. Again, the verticals are not fixed. I'm going to go ahead and do that in post-production after the fact. It's another one. You can see why it's important to make sure your camera is secured in case it gets bumped. There's been a few time lapses so far where the tripod was bumped a little bit, but this is such a long sequence that doesn't really matter. Now this is a good example of this first one here. You can see the light changing. I think this time lapse was over the course of probably an hour and a half long period, maybe 2 hours. But you can see why, there's literally no way the human eye can see that without a time lapse. And you can see why I wanted to capture that with time lapse, so that I can speed that 2 hour period up into just a few seconds. And once I add this to the actual video, I'll probably speed it up even more just so it's not as long of a clip, because it's a super impactful shot, but it's just not going to be something that I'm going to want to be taking up a significant amount of time in this video. Okay, and that's it. Hopefully you found this tutorial helpful. I'd encourage you to go download at least a trial of LR Timelapse and practice yourself. You can even just set up a time lapse in your room and in your office that you're sitting at right now, maybe even on a real estate shoot or an architecture shoot. Just set up a separate camera, run a time lapse, and bring it back into LR Timelapse and see what you can come up with. If you have any questions about the entire process, please feel free to let me know. If you ask me questions that I don't know the answer to, that only makes me smarter when it comes to how to use this program. So I welcome any questions you have. I may even have to do a tutorial that shows a day to night time lapse as well, because that's a special time lapse, and I'd really like to share what that looks like. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.